What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the garage. Today I'm going to be tackling a fairly in-depth install, and that is for the Cobb air oil separator. As you can see here, there's a ton of hoses. Here's the actual unit itself. Got the instructions on a website there because they don't come with paper instructions like most things nowadays. And here's a little hardware pack. And like I said, it's a fairly in-depth install. It shouldn't be too hard, but it's probably going to be a little bit time consuming. So let's jump right into it. So before we get started actually mounting the unit and running the hoses, we're going to have to clean up this corner of the car just a little bit. And that's going to involve removing this bracket, unclipping the main wiring harness here, and moving these brake lines just out of the way so we can fit the actual unit in place. So first off, we'll start, this is the O2 sensor plug. We'll just kind of free it from the bracket here. Oop, just like that. Tuck that guy out of the way. Next up, we'll free up this bracket here by removing this 10mm nut. I guess there's one more up here. So I'll make that two 10mm nuts. Alright, so the bracket should be free from the body. And now we can free this harness plug here from this bracket using a flathead screwdriver under here to just pry off this little clip. And it comes out sideways like that. So we won't be using this anymore, so you can put this away for safekeeping or do whatever you want with it. Next, we want to give this O2 plug wire just a little bit extra slack. So we're going to want to remove this tape. You can kind of see the end here. There should just be an extra piece here. Take this off so our sensor wire can have a little bit more movement. Wires are separated just like that, and we'll just clean up any remaining adhesive with some brake cleaner or adhesive remover just on a rag. Next up, we're going to want to raise up these brake lines just a little bit by prying on these. It's a good idea to put a rag on the end of your pry tool not to scratch your paint. And essentially you want this brake line kind of in line with the top of this nut, and then this lower one up kind of where this top one would sit. And that should give us enough room to mount our air oil separator down here. So you're gonna wanna be very, very, very gentle when you do this. It's easy enough, you can just do it by hand or use a pry bar. So something like that should be sufficient. You may need to adjust that once you start mocking up the actual unit. Next, we'll move on to removing the PCV valve and fitting. This is you're kind of looking for this if you're not sure, right by the turbo here. And I've actually replaced the PCV valve before, so that's why there is a worm clamp on there. Usually they are these crimped fittings, which aren't too bad to open up. Just kind of stick a screwdriver in here and pop it open. But what we're going to want to do is remove this and this teeing piece here, and basically everything that's connected onto this. So now that we've got the PCV assembly off of the engine block, take some pliers here, remove this, and we'll save that hose. Next, we'll take this bit of hose and this fitting here, and we'll basically assemble it like this. You may want some WD-40 or something just to lube it up. This is a bit of a tight fit. And we're going to want something like that. And we'll move to the car and get this one on. So here's our replacement hose installed. Now that that is done, we can move on to starting to assemble the actual hoses onto the AOS itself. So first thing for assembling our AOS and the lines is we'll take our upper coolant hose, which goes into this port. The upper side has these 2 ports, and there's going to be 2 pre-assembled hoses with these ORB fittings on there. The one that you want to go to the top has this extended fitting with the hole in here for air bleeding. This shorter one here is the lower hose. So these do have a little bit of lube on them. Just sort of get these in here and snug them up. Make sure that you don't crush the O-ring. And then you're going to want to use your 8 AN wrench to snug that up. And we'll do the same for the lower coolant hose. And again, we'll use our 8 AN wrench to snug this up. So we should be left with something that looks like this. So next up, we'll take our PCV hose, which looks like this, has the joint in the middle here, and we'll put some Teflon tape on this threaded fitting here, which by the way is plastic, so be a little bit more gentle with it. And we'll take that and install it into this threaded hole here into the top of the AOS. And we can tighten this up using a 6-Allen wrench. So that should be good like that. Next we can flip the AOS over and install the mounting bracket. The instructions say for 08 plus GR vehicles, typical mounting bracket is one from the top, which I'm assuming is this hole because this is the top of the AOS, so you're going to want to install it something like this. And I'll just snug these up using a number 5 Allen key. So let's move this whole thing to the car and get this situated in place. So I think just to make this a little bit easier, I'm just going to unplug this engine harness. Just a couple clips here. Should go back. Come apart. So. Put this all out of the way. Alright, so we're pretty close, but looks like we have to bend these brake lines in a little bit more closer to the shock tower just to get this to sit flush here. And the first time when I had this, or tried to install it, I did have this bracket upside down. So you kind of want it pointed down like this and not up how I had it originally. So we'll pull this back out and bend those brake lines, and this thing should fit pretty good. Well, it looks like we're running into an issue hitting the cowl here, so I think I'll take this out again and move the bracket one hole up just to give us a little bit more clearance. So there's the unit installed onto its bracket down here using existing mounting holes. And you can see the clearance that we got here. So it is kind of like a, damn kids. You do kind of have to finesse this thing in here if you don't want to scratch the shit out of it. And yeah, like I found, I had to switch this mounting bracket up from what they suggested in the instructions and put it all the way up to the top, so that way it would drop it down just enough to clear the cowl here. And yeah, so just for now we'll just tuck these extra hoses out of the way. Yeah, so far it's looking pretty good. Everything's looking pretty matchy. Red from the GNP, red from AEM, red from Cobb, red from Airlift. Now I'll move on to the next step, which I believe is rerouting this big fat wiring harness here out of the way. So let's get to that. So what we're going to want to do is remove this 10mm bolt right here that holds all this power steering stuff to this bracket. Next up, we're going to take this flat bracket that was provided and take our big end of the harness here and slide this in just how the original was. And we might have to lift this up just a little bit. Just like that. So this is going to take a little bit of juggling of hoses and wires, but what we're going to want to do here is take our engine harness and take that 10mm bolt that we removed and bolt this back down into the existing hole. So we basically want something like that. Just route all this in a way that none of the wires are being strained and nothing's rubbing on anything else, and basically you should be good. Now that we've got our wiring harness all sorted out, we'll move on to some more hoses. So next up, we're going to want to take this 1/2-inch hose with the heat shield on. Just be careful because there is a 5/8 here, and you slide the heat shield back. There you go, 1/2 inch. So we'll take this hose and we'll use these spring clamps here, and essentially what we want to do is connect this one to the bottom port here and route it around, and connect the other end into this small fitting here onto the PCV. Next up, we'll take our 5/8 line with the heat shield on it, and we'll connect it down here on the larger port, and then the other end will connect here. And it does say in the instructions that if you can't actually get this to bend nicely, what you can do is chop off a bit of this and use this elbow adapter. So basically cut a little piece off, put that on there, and then you'll have a nice 90 to rotate that around and direct it into this port. And now we'll just come in here and secure all of our connections with the supplied zip ties. Now that we've got this contraption all rigged up and mounted, we can move on to the driver's side valve cover, and we're going to want to find the two hoses in here. Kind of see those there. There's two hoses here. One has a crimped end and one will have a sort of a clamp style. What you're going to want to do is loosen this clamp style one and remove this hose, and this here is the other end of it. This attached to your intercooler crossover tubes.
So that's the hose there. It might have a little clip here, just anchoring it to another hose, but yeah, it's kind of weird. I haven't seen one of these clamps yet on this whole car, so maybe they ran out of the other style at the factory and used one of these, but these ones are way easier to remove. So for the next part of the install, we're going to want to replace that breather hose with some of this bulk 1/2-inch hose. And I don't know if you can see this from here, but we are going to want to attach it to the middle port here. And again, it's probably easiest if you chop off a little bit of hose, use the supplied spring clamp, and use one of the supplied 90s, just so you can route this out and around without having a kink in the hose.
Place this back down here. Make sure that spring clamp is all the way down.
Next, just choose whichever way you want to route all this 1/2-inch hose. Again, it's bulk, so you don't have to use all of it, but just make sure there is a little bit of slop there for engine movement. So it took me a couple of attempts, but this is the routing that I've figured for the driver's side. Valve cover breather, middle port, across the top here, front of the brake master cylinder, and to this 90. And if you can see that down there, some wires in the way. Down to the breather. So I actually chose to cut a longer length of hose and actually raise this up because I figured there was just too much stuff in there, and you know, it was easier to route it like this. I may end up changing this once I get the intercooler and whatnot in here, but for now I think I'm happy with that. And I think that's probably how I'm going to do the other side, which is up next. Essentially it's the same thing. See if you can see it in here. This side's a little bit more tightly packed, but essentially we're going to do the same thing, and that's basically going to attach to this port here. I've gone ahead and got the passenger side valve cover vent hose here installed. How's it going, buddy? This bend was a little tight, so I used one of the elbows here just to kind of get this nicely down and around. And you'll notice that I cut my finger off there. Maybe you saw it, but when I pulled the factory hose off, my nail got caught on here and pretty much ripped half of it off. So yeah, that feels super nice. So that's pretty much it. Next up, we're gonna deviate a little bit from the instructions because this turbo inlet doesn't have a provision for the PCV diagnosis port. which is this guy here. So we're gonna kind of jump over to the torque solutions instructions. It's pretty simple, as you can see. It'll focus there. There's a little pin in there. What you're gonna wanna do is pull that out with some pliers, and then, let's see here, should be one of these guys. Should be this connector here. What you're going to want to do is just take that little pin and put it into the connector, and then secure that with some electrical tape, and then just tie this out of the way, and then that should be good for that. And there's that little connector right there. That's all it is. Make sure you don't lose that. Take our connector here. If you're not sure which one it is, just take the plug here and fit it in. There's some little indents in here, so this is how you know that that is the right one. And then take this guy and slot him in just like that, and take some tape or whatever you want and just secure this, and then you can tie this connector out of the way. But just in case, don't throw this out. Something like this should be sufficient. You don't have to go too crazy with it. Just make sure that pin doesn't fall out. Alright guys, so for the last little bit here, I've just got my intake manifold and coolant reservoir mounted. You may even want your intercooler here, just for this hose, just to make sure everything's routed and has enough clearance. Initially when I did this, I didn't have the intake manifold in, and I just ran these straight and realized that wasn't gonna fit. And again, we are going a little bit off from the instructions with just the routing of these two hoses, because this is a Torque Solutions turbo inlet, and it doesn't have the PCV provision. I did contact Cobb to see if they had any suggestions, because their V1 turbo inlet is the same basically as this, and they basically told me to ask Torque Solutions how to do this, and Torque Solutions told me to ask Cobb how to do this. So, you know, this may or may not be exactly the right way to do it, but as far as I can tell, this is the way most people have done it. But essentially what you want to do here is take your upper coolant hose, and you're just going to route it here like this and trim it and attach it to this nipple here. And then what I've come up with is this left hose comes out and around into this 90, and the right hose follows it along into this 90, and then down here is where I'm going to plumb in the boost controller. And I have left a little bit of slack here just so I can adjust if needed, and I haven't pushed these on all the way, just so I can move things around, because this intake manifold will be coming off once more. But yeah, that pretty much wraps up the Cobb AOS install. A bit time consuming. Honestly, it's not that bad. It seems a little bit daunting, but instructions are fairly clear. I found most of the time it was just figuring out how to route the hoses and come up with a clean solution to get all of this stuff tucked away and away from heat sources. But overall, not too bad of a job. But anyways, that's it for today. Thanks for watching.